Right. Here are uh, is a quick summary for Second Chronicles, chapters 1 and 2, where we see an asking for wisdom and preparation to build the temple. Okay. In chapter 1, we see that Solomon began his reign firmly established, and the Lord was with him, granting great favor. He gathered all Israel's leaders, including commanders, judges, and heads of families, at Gibeon. They all gathered together at Gibeon because that was where the tabernacle of meeting was, the tent of meeting was, built by Moses. And that was also where the bronze altar made by Bezalel all the way back, right? In Exodus, we saw that it was located there. And Solomon went to seek God. Now, keep in mind, the Ark of God had been taken to Jerusalem, if you remember, but the tabernacle of meeting and the bronze altar were still at Gibeon because that was where King Saul had last left them. Okay, he offered 1,000 burnt sacrifices on the bronze altar before the Lord. That night, God appeared to Solomon and invited him to ask for anything he desired. Solomon asked for wisdom and knowledge to govern God's people faithfully. God was pleased with Solomon's request, noting that he had not asked for wealth, honor, or a long life. The Lord granted him wisdom and knowledge, along with riches, honor, and fame beyond all kings. Solomon returned to Jerusalem and reigned over Israel with great prosperity. His wealth and power increased as silver and gold became abundant. If you read that chapter, you saw that silver and gold became as common as stones on the ground. That's how prosperous Solomon became during his reign. And chariots and horses also multiplied. During Solomon's reign, Israel engaged in importing horses from Egypt and Kuwait, and being central and Israel became central in the trade and export to the Hittites and Syria. Now, if you remember from Deuteronomy, this was a big no for kings per God's will and desire for how kings should conduct themselves in Israel. But we will focus more on that during the discussion. Chapter 2, Solomon prepared to build a temple for the Lord and a royal palace for himself. We know how David basically set him up for success by preparing all the materials, preparing all the people, and just passing off the baton to Solomon. And Solomon, as we can see, is faithfully continuing and starting from where his father left off for him. Solomon sends word to Hiram, king of Tyre, not the first time we've seen this person, and requested skilled craftsmen and cedar logs from Lebanon because Lebanon had very good uh, um, cedar logs and trees that were known uh, for use in craftsmanship and in structures, construction. Solomon reminded Hiram of their father's friendship and asked for the same cooperation David had received. He explained that the temple would be great because it was dedicated to the Lord, the God of heaven. Solomon acknowledged that no one could truly contain God, yet he sought to build a place for worship and sacrifice. He requested a master craftsman skilled in working with gold, silver, bronze, iron, purple, crimson, and blue fabrics. He promised to supply food for Hiram's workers with wheat, barley, wine, and oil as payment for their labor. Hiram responded favorably, praising the Lord for giving Solomon wisdom and agreeing to send materials and workers, notably Haramabi, who was half Israelite and also half from Lebanon. His father was from Lebanon. His mother was from the tribe of Dan, and he was someone who was skilled in all these things. Solomon organized 153,600 resident foreigners in Israel into a task force, 70,000 laborers, 80,000 stonecutters, and 3,600 overseers. All right, now that is just a brief summary of these two chapters. We're going to spend uh, the next kind of block of time doing what we usually do. Uh, we've, again, because of our time in First Kings, Second Kings, we've read a lot about Solomon. But again, just like how Deuteronomy provides so much info like behind the scenes, if you will, sneak peeks, if you will, of what was going on with Moses and the Israelites in the wilderness. In the same way, First and Second Chronicles, it's a review, but it enhances our understanding by giving us, showing us things that weren't available to us in First and Second Kings. But anywho, let's spend the next couple of minutes uh, going through chapters 1 and 2. I will put the link to the doc in the chat, and we will regroup to share and talk. Here we go. Moving this along. All right, chapter 1. We see the Lord his God was with him and made him exceedingly great in verse 1. So we saw it in First Chronicles 29, verse 1. David is praying in his one of his final public addresses to the people. David is praying and addressing to the people, but as he's telling the people, he's saying, Solomon, my son, God has chosen him, but he is young and inexperienced, right? That's what David says. But see how Solomon is enough because God was with him. And God was making him exceedingly great, not just barely making the mark, not just, schlepping along. God is making him exceedingly great despite his youth, despite his inexperience. It's only because God is with him. And notice how it says the Lord his God, right? It's referring to Solomon's God. So it's not just the Lord God of David. Solomon loved God and he wanted to know the God of his father so that he could call this God his own as well. So we must know that God chose him for a reason. God loved him for a reason. All right. Solomon spoke to all Israel. Okay. Notice how he is addressing commanders, judges, leaders, heads of fathers' houses, right? People who are older than him, have seen more than him, right? Who probably know more than him. But just as the king, Solomon is speaking to all Israel. So notice that he did not need anyone to speak for him. He did not, stay back in fear, apprehension. God established him and gave him the authority that he needed. Okay. So we see that Solomon gathers the commanders and the judges and the leaders and the heads of fathers' houses, and all of them assemble in the high place that was at Gibeon. And I know when we see high place, it's kind of like, wait a second, right? But this was the last place where the legitimate tent of meeting, right? The tent of the tabernacle, um, the ark, and uh, the altar were. But the ark was taken away uh, by Saul during one of the during like battles, and it was after that saga that it was left, or it eventually ends up in Abinadab's. I'm sorry. Yes, Abinadab's house. But anywho, we see that Solomon seeks out this place in Gibeon. And this is the exact tent of meeting that Moses, the servant of the Lord, had made. And it makes it clear, I forgot to highlight it, but there is the bronze altar that Bezalel, the son of Uri, had made. So things that we have definitely seen before. So we see that it's the same tent of meeting where Moses used to converse with God, right? And the preserved bronze altar from the wilderness days. Bezalel was anointed with the Spirit to build and craft according to God's will, if we remember, all right? If I can take your attention really quickly, I know we don't have the time, but Exodus chapter 31, verse 1 to 7. And this is on purpose too. Like, this is not Solomon making a random side quest. Like, it is so deliberate that he happens to be here in this exact place where Moses had built this tabernacle and Bezalel built this bronze altar. And the fact that Solomon's the one who's chosen to build the temple of God, it's all purposeful. Exodus chapter 31, verse 1 to 7 reads. Okay. The Lord said to Moses, See, I have called by name Bezalel the son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, to work in every craft. And behold, I have appointed with them Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan. And I have given to all able men ability that they may make all that I have commanded you, the tent of meeting, the ark of the testimony, and the mercy seat that is on it, and all the furnishings of the tent. So this is what we're talking about here, and these are all the same things that have been preserved right now in Solomon's time, and Solomon's going there to worship. So as we can see later on, you're going to see the parallels of all the things when Solomon is asking King Hiram of Tyre to send him skilled workers in gold, silver, all these things. You need to keep in mind Bezalel and Aholiab, ex-slaves, right? All of Israel, ex-slaves, they were able to build for the Lord because the Spirit of God was given to them, was upon them, to create in them what was lacking and to build through them things that were beautiful, things that were used for worship, and things that were preserved till this day, till Solomon's time. Okay, so notice how Solomon and the assembly sought it out. They had to leave Jerusalem and find where Gibeon was, where the tent of meeting was, where the bronze altar was, right? So I saw this as returning to the beginning, coming back to the elementary basics in a sense, because Solomon technically could have waited for the new altar, right, that would eventually be built in the new temple, because David's been amassing all this gold, bronze, all this stuff that's going to be used to build the things, the utensils, the objects in the new temple. So Solomon could have just waited for that to be built before he started, worshiping. Or he could have, sacrificed and worshipped at an altar that was nearer to Jerusalem for convenience. But Solomon wasn't satisfied with starting his reign and eventual construction of the temple through seeking God's voice just from others, just through the prophets, through the seers, through the priests. Now that didn't happen because, as we know, David, he received a lot from the priests and the prophets and the seers in his life, but David also received from God directly. So Solomon wanted to hear God, wanted to seek God directly. So he left his comfort zone of Jerusalem, the palace, where he was, and he sought out with the assembly of Israel, sought out the bronze altar that was built during the time of Moses. And notice how it says Solomon went up there to the bronze altar before the Lord. So Solomon's not sending just servants to do it for him. He is going there before the Lord. So notice how it says before the Lord, God's presence was there. The bronze altar wasn't just a glorified memento of vain ritual or something of the past. Solomon was going to seek God's presence, come back to the basics, and worship to start his rule, knowing his need for God, even though God's favor was already with him for the sake of David. Again, God is faithful to the promises and the vows that he makes, right? So when God made that covenant with David, obviously God said that God would be with David's son Solomon. But here, Solomon is not just taking that for granted, saying, oh, God's going to fulfill his promise to my father. Solomon wants to make his own relationship with God, right? Not just have favor for the sake of David, because he did. Notice, the Lord his God was with him, made him exceedingly great. Before it says he went out and sought God at this bronze altar at Gibeon. Okay. He offered 1,000 burnt offerings on it. So notice how this altar is having a reinstated purpose. Now we're not I'm not actually sure personally, if this altar had been regularly used up until this point, that I do not know. But I see this as a reinstated purpose for that altar in particular, for united worship of the nation of Israel. Because, till that point, there were seasons where there were so many other high places that Samuel started, and, this altar at Gibeon no longer represented the worship for all of Israel, like it used to during the times of the wilderness. But now, with Solomon coming back with literally all of the heads of Israel, it's like corporate worship, united worship for the nation of Israel again, to start off this era of a new reign. This is not for merely show or appearance with some other intention or motivation that Solomon was hiding, because we can see that God appears to Solomon that night, that very night. God appears to Solomon, and God doesn't just appear for no reason. And also, we know that God doesn't just appear in unholiness, right? So if there was some other intention, motivation, God would see straight through that. But God is still showing up because he's showing favor with Solomon. He is pleased with Solomon. So God searches the heart in worship. I don't have the time to go back through the history of all this, but Absalom, Solomon's older brother, Absalom, there is a portion where we see that Absalom, when he was plotting to overthrow his father, when he was trying to garner the affection and the trust of the people of Israel to turn against his father, he went. I'm forgetting where he went, but Hebron, and because he told his father, "Oh, I have some vows to make to the Lord." So he goes there and he offers a lot of sacrifices, and it's pretty showy. And the people are like, "Oh, look at Absalom! Look at how great he is! Look at how he's worshiping God! Look at how he's making, fulfilling his vows to God in Hebron." Everything looks right on the outside, but his intentions were different. But again, we don't see God coming down appearing to Absalom, but we see God appearing to Solomon because God sees the heart. Okay. When God appears to Solomon and says, "Ask, what shall I give you?" Solomon's not straight going into what he wants, or well, let me explain. He says, "You have shown great and steadfast love to David, my father." So Solomon was aware of his father's relationship with God and his father's testimony. I'm not going to harp on it, but take it as you will. That's pretty important. Solomon says, "Let your word to David, my father, be now fulfilled." God is asking him, "What do you want? I will give you whatever you ask for." Solomon is, even before the wisdom, he's saying, "Let your word to David, my father, be now fulfilled." He's asking that God's will may be done, that God's will may be done in his life with his reign. And also, he's holding on to the promises of God. He's saying, "You made this promise to David, my father. Please fulfill it," right? Potentially sowing in tears, question mark, right? I don't know. It doesn't say explicitly here, but one could imagine, right? He's young, he's inexperienced, he doesn't have his father with him anymore, right? And he's praying, he's asking, "How am I going to lead such a great people without your help, right? Without you fulfilling your word to my father David?" Okay. People as numerous as the dust of the earth. I can't help but think of Abraham, right? I mean, we started from the bottom. Like, look at where we are now, right? God has a good track record with keeping promises. So I think it's not ironic, pretty purposeful that Solomon is saying, "Let your word be fulfilled," right? "Because you have made me king over a people as numerous as the dust of the earth." The literal patriarch of this people who are now the dust of the earth is Abraham. And the reason why they're the dust of the earth is because God fulfilled that promise to Abraham. So God has the best track record for keeping promises. Okay. Uh Solomon asking him, God, for wisdom and knowledge. Notice it says, "To go out and come in before this people, for who can govern this people of yours?" Asking for wisdom was not the wrong thing. And it's not wisdom that is bad, but notice what Solomon is asking for that wisdom to be used towards. I noticed this for the first time when I read, and I don't know, it kind of changed my perspective a bit because Solomon does not want to lead by himself. He's aware of his own weaknesses and shortcomings. He's asking God to equip him so that he can fulfill his calling correctly. What is his calling? To be king of Israel, to build a temple of God. But ultimately, even after the temple is built, he still needs to be king of Israel, right? So Solomon didn't need wisdom to be faithful to God, though. He's not asking for that wisdom because God's not showing up to Solomon in the first place because Solomon has wisdom. God is showing up because he's pleased with Solomon. Solomon is asking for the wisdom to lead the people. That's what this wisdom is supposed to be for. Remember what David prayed for Solomon in 1 Chronicles 29, verse 19. If you guys weren't here last week, that was huge. 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 19. David is praying on behalf of Solomon. David is asking God, "Grant to Solomon my son a whole heart, that he may keep your commandments, your testimonies, and your statutes, performing all, and that he may build the palace for which I have made provision." So again, great, we talked about last week, great amounts of wisdom are not the prerequisite for keeping God's commands, but a whole heart. That is the prerequisite that is offered to God. Solomon's wisdom eventually made him compartmentalize his heart, right? That wisdom was supposed to be used in regards to leading the people, but when his heart was not aligned, that wisdom did not achieve the purpose that God gave it to him for, right? Because if Solomon's only purpose was building the temple, right? What if Solomon tried to satisfy himself with that thought, like, "Oh, yes, I built the temple. At least I built the temple. Obviously, I'm being faithful to God, right? But David is praying, let him keep your testimony, statutes, performing all. It's not just about the temple, it's about Solomon being faithful to God. So, what if when Solomon was building the altars for the pagan idols for his pagan wives, maybe Solomon rested in that fact, oh, at least these altars are less grand than the temple of God, right? So it's not a problem. Like the wisdom that he was not using in unalignment with God's will convinced him of that fact, that he was okay, right? That he was still finding that loophole. But those altars never should have existed. That's the point. So devotion to God is not just a one-time box to check off. It wasn't satisfied with just the temple being built. But anyway, I'm sorry. I needed to get this across. I know time is flying, but we'll rush through the others. And if there's stuff that we don't get to hit, hopefully we'll talk about it next week. But anyway, back to this. God appeared to Solomon and spoke to him directly because Solomon did what pleased God before asking and receiving wisdom. Solomon is not seeking God as a wise man. God is not showing up to Solomon because Solomon is a wise man. God did it because Solomon pleased him before the wisdom. So Solomon was always meant to please God with wholeheartedness. It's not through wisdom that he reached God, it is through wholeheartedness that he reached God. He asked God for wisdom to help lead the people. All right. Caleb, are you trying to talk?
Sorry, my system mic was muted instead. Okay. So what I was saying was, let me restart. Um, but I was saying that obviously in this section it's talking about God's response to Solomon's request that he had given after God had said, "Oh, I will grant you anything that you ask for right now," and uh, and Solomon asked for wisdom. And the thing is that in fact wisdom is a good thing to ask for, and God was evidently pleased with this request. God was God found it to be a blessed thing to ask for because he didn't ask for anything that was exactly self-serving, but rather Solomon said, "Oh, give me the wisdom so that I may serve your kingdom." That's essentially what he said. This kingdom that you have provided my father, this large kingdom, it's so grand. I need wisdom to be able to serve it properly, and even what he asked for, which was wisdom to serve, it was a blessed thing in God's eyes. I feel like sometimes after reading the story, some people say that oh look, wisdom is sinful as well. No, I don't think so, because otherwise I feel like when asking for wisdom, God wouldn't have been so pleased with the fact that he is asking for wisdom. But the thing is that wisdom obviously cannot be the only nature that you have or the only quality you have. Wisdom without humility is a trap of death, and later in Solomon's life, you can watch, you can see, or eventually he ends up. He's the one who writes, "Oh, everything is vain. There's no point in anything in this world." Um, but see, when you have a lot of wisdom without humility, things can go wrong. But wisdom itself is a very blessed thing to be asking for. And after all, we know everything that is good, and especially like I said before, wisdom comes from heaven, and God has told us, "Oh, if any of you are lacking in wisdom, ask God, who's the one who gives everything or who has all of it." So yeah.
Um, Pretty much backing off of what Caleb said, like because of like Solomon's priority of wisdom over like power, riches, and everything, and prioritizing like God's own people over himself. Like he was blessed with everything that he could ever need. Like he was so rich and so like honorable that like even after him and before him there were no kings like him.
Really great point. Hearing you guys like Proverbs 1 verse 7, right? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That the groundwork and the foundation of Solomon's request for wisdom was the fact that he feared God. But later on, we see that the problem starts when that fear of God gets diluted instead of, the wisdom being from the fear of God. The wisdom starts impacting Solomon's perspective of the fear of God. That's where the problem, the red flags start. Let's okay. It's partially my fault, but I couldn't have gone through that first part without talking all about that. So we'll talk about chapter 2, God willing, next week. But let's continue. Okay. Um. Yeah. Silver and gold was made as common in Jerusalem as stone. Now, in face value, that is showing the prosperity and the abundance that came upon Solomon and by proxy Israel, and that was God being faithful to what he said he would do. God did say riches, possessions, honor. God did say that, and that's why Solomon, had all this. But I don't know, this line, silver and gold being made as common as stones, it didn't, I don't know, it's supposed to be showing wealth, but it rubbed off, or it comes off as like uh, I don't know what the word is, sort of like a, not a sickening sense, but sort of like, I don't know, something doesn't seem right, something seems off in a sense. And Reba goes on to cite this later on, but Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 16 to 20, we've referenced this so many times, right? We've read it directly and then we reference it so many times. It goes to show that wisdom without wholeheartedness to God, again, wholeheartedness that David prayed for Solomon to have with God, right? What is that wholeheartedness? David said, so that he can follow, so that he may keep God's commandments, testimonies, statutes, performing all. That's what David prayed for Solomon, right? So wisdom without wholeheartedness is making Solomon start. This is the beginning. Start to override God's warnings for kings. And in Deuteronomy 17, verse 16 to 20, uh, just to read it because I know Reba will cite it. But 17, verse 16 to 20. Okay, it says, only he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priests, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers. Caleb mentioned pride, or rather humility, so that this wisdom can be used in alignment with God's will, right? God clocked it like generations before. That he may not be lifted above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. So go back and revisit that when you get a chance. But it's huge. It feels as if God is kind of calling it, predicting everything that these kings, especially Solomon, are about to, the choices that they're going to make, the choices that you're going to have to face.
In read in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 16, the kings of Israel were specifically warned not to multiply horses or cause the people to return to Egypt for them. Yet we see them going back on those words. Solomon is blessed and has much wealth, yet we see him compromising here. And this goes to show that spiritual decline can even happen during our seasons of blessings, where God has blessed us with everything, but our pride and greed gets in the way and pushes us to get more, even though God knows how much we need. In a sense, it's like we are judging God's capabilities and forgetting what God can and has done. And that's why it is so important that even through our blessings, that we keep our focus on God, keeping our hearts aligned with God, like Christine mentioned.
Amen. One, like with the silver and gold that we mentioned, things seeming off, right? It's because God doesn't seem to be involved. Yes, God is the reason for this abundance, but with all this silver and gold that has been made common, it seems almost wasteful. Like this is not going towards anything that God wants it to go towards almost. Because I look back at this, offering 1,000 burnt offerings. Now, this is before receiving wisdom, right? But I feel like I don't remember where I saw this. I think I looked at the commentary for this portion a little bit ago, and it was talking about like this. It seems excessive, does it not? But God was pleased by this because God saw his heart, right? So something about the heart posture during this era where gold and silver is made in common in Jerusalem. Now notice the it seems excessive, the 1,000 burnt offerings, but all of that was going towards worship, true and proper worship, glorifying God. So all that abundance that Solomon already had as what was set in place with David from David's reign, right? Solomon was using that abundance to give back to God. Here, this silver and gold is being thrown in, it's being treated like rocks and stones. That's how abundant the kingdom has become. But blessings are not becoming praise to God. We're not seeing that directed, that abundance and that wealth being directed into praise and worship and things that are going towards God. That was that off feeling. But anyway, yeah, just piggybacking off of the great point that Reba made. One thing can lead to another. This doesn't even mention Solomon taking a wife from Egypt yet, but that's exactly what's coming, right? Even if Solomon went into it not, not thinking about that at all, trade relations with Egypt is what led Solomon to form an alliance with them and marry his first of many foreign wives, starting with Pharaoh's daughter, right? So all three requirements and warnings of God for the kings seemingly broken in the very same chapter that Solomon pleases God and receives wisdom from God. So it's humbling, it's sobering, because it reminds us to wake up and figure out where we are with God, even in the midst of favor, right? Even in the midst of peace and abundance and wealth, where exactly do we stand? What we read in Deuteronomy chapter 17, like verse 19 and 20, the king was supposed to have a copy of the law with him at all times so that he could read it all the days of his life. It had to be approved by the Levites, right? Made sure that he didn't have some weird different copy than the actual law. And the king had to follow it. And that's what David was praying for Solomon, right? Wholeheartedness to fully and completely follow God's commandments. But we see Solomon, if he had the law with him, he would have acted in a, or if that was in the forefront of his mind in wholeheartedness, if that wisdom was being directed by wholeheartedness, then we would not be seeing this. But all three are being broken in Solomon's lifetime in his reign as king. Uh, so gives us a warning. He sowed it. We come to understand, assume, imply that he sowed in tears, but this is not the exact direction. Despite the fact that he's reaping a lot. But what are we doing with what we're reaping? Our heart posture? Is our heart? Are we giving God our whole heart? And with that, we are concluding our discussion on Second Chronicles chapter 1.